It's just past 11 p.m. on a bitter January night. A student is turned away from a Hull nightclub due to being too drunk. Her friends put her in a taxi and sent her home. Moments later, she's found alone, cold, intoxicated, and vulnerable. Within the hour, a man is caught on CCTV circling the streets, watching her every move. He stops, he approaches, and in a matter of minutes, a city is left shaken, a family is destroyed, and the world is reminded how predators often hide in plain sight. Hello, welcome back to Murder and Mysteries with Moon. I am so sorry for the delay in this video, but you know, sometimes life loves to throw you a curveball and send you off track. But it's all sorted now, I'm back, and I cannot wait to get into this story with all of you. I've been waiting to record this for days. I'm so excited. I do just want to start by giving my usual disclaimer that this video is for informational and educational purposes only. All of the information given in this video is publicly available online. It is not my intent to sensationalise or glorify crime or the events of this video. I am just aiming to promote awareness as much as I can. All of the opinions expressed in this video are mine and mine alone. So, without further ado, let's get into the case. Tonight we are in Kingston upon Hull in East Yorkshire. We're tracing the final hours of a 21-year-old philosophy student whose disappearance sparked the largest missing person search in the history of the Humberside police force. This is the story of Libby Squire, better known as Libby Squire. It's the story of her life, her final moments, and the predator who stalked her and cut her life tragically short. Let's start by talking about who Libby was. Libby Anna Squire was born on New Year's Day in 1998 in High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire. She was one of the first babies born in the year, apparently, according to her mum, so that's really cool. And she was one of 4 children cherished by her parents, Lisa and Russell, and her younger siblings. Libby was actually the eldest child in her little family unit, and she was the best big sister to her 3 siblings, Beth, Maisie and Jo. Her mum, Lisa, later said in an interview that she had the most beautiful smile. She was kind, she was thoughtful, and she just had the biggest heart. Throughout her school life, Libby excelled in English and literature, and her sharp, curious mind led her to study philosophy at the University of Hull. Her friends described her as someone who always put other people first. So we'll just talk a little bit about Libby's uni life and the events leading up to her final night. Libby had chosen Hull University for its vibrant student life and its philosophy programme, which Libby felt challenged her to question ideas about her ethics, about truth, and the entire kind of meaning of existence. Her course mates remembered her as someone who loved to debate, like she would go ham during debates. But apparently she always made room for laughter and kindness, so she never did it in a harsh or malicious way. In the months before her disappearance, Libby had settled well into her student life. She was living in shared accommodation with some of her best friends, and she was managing fairly well, you know, to balance her essays and her late night conversations with, you know, the nights out, the student university nights out that, you know, define your student years. I know a lot of us have had that experience. Now, that particular January marked the start of a new semester at the University of Hull. All of the students had just returned to their accommodation after the Christmas break. So all of the spirits were really high. They'd just spent a lot of time with their families. But there was an eagerness to reconnect with their friends. They'd missed each other. They wanted to swap stories about their Christmas break and, you know, have a little party, have a nice night out, spend some time together. So Libby and her friends had planned a night at the Welly Club on Beverly Road in Hull, which is one of Hull's most popular student venues. It's, you know, it was the go-to place. We all know that one place that's known for, you know, the cheap drinks, the theme nights, the good atmosphere, the good tunes. So for students like Libby in Hull, it was the place to be. It was a place where they could go, you know, to get rid of the stress about their essays and their deadlines and just lose themselves and relax in laughter and dancing and drinks with their friends. So her friends later said that the night began in typical student fashion. They were in their accommodation. They had music playing in the kitchen. They were having some pre-drinks before they left in the kitchen. Everyone was taking turns playing DJ and getting ready, doing the makeup, taking photos. You know, for Libby, it was meant to be a night of celebration, the first night back in Hull after weeks away, to reconnect with her friends, to catch up. It was a night that should have been ordinary for Libby, a night that should have ended with them all getting into a taxi home, you know, laughter echoing through the corridors of the student accommodation. But sadly, as we now know, it would be the last night of Libby's life and the last night her friends would get with her. So the timeline of events on the 31st of January 2019 is that at 11:18 p.m, CCTV footage shows Libby being refused entry to the Welly nightclub on Beverly Road due to being too drunk. At this point, her friends can be seen putting her into a taxi to take her home. Now, at 11:25 p.m, a taxi driver reported dropping her off near her home on Wellesley Avenue. Now, the reports kind of vary on this, with some saying that she may have briefly entered her accommodation and then came back out. But either way, we know she didn't stay home, and witnesses later reported her walking unsteadily along the street in the freezing cold. Now, at 11:50 p.m, she's seen sitting on a bench near Haworth Street, and she is seen crying, disorientated, and saying that she needs to call her mum. The taxi driver has been identified and he has done interviews, and bless him, this poor man, he feels so responsible for what happened to Libby. He feels like he should have done more. But he said, you know, he was given the address, she was loaded into his taxi by her friends, and that's exactly where he took her. And there is CCTV footage showing his taxi dropping her off, you know, turning down her road and dropping her off outside her student accommodation. At which point, you know, he left, he went on to his next job. He feels terrible that he didn't wait to make sure that she got into the house safely. But it's not always something that you would think of doing, and nobody can hold that against him. I do just feel so bad for him because he clearly feels responsible for what happened to Libby. But her mum has come out and said that what she believes happened is that she got out of the taxi, she considered going back into the house, but what actually happened was that she was really frustrated and kind of angry about the fact that she had been turned away from the nightclub. So she went for a walk to try and calm down because she was too kind of wound up to go to bed. Obviously, she'd been expecting to go on a night out with her friends. This was their first night out after the Christmas break. and it was something that she was looking forward to. So the fact that she hadn't been able to do that and she'd been turned away from the nightclub and sent home, I can imagine that maybe she was annoyed, and she was a little embarrassed, maybe even, you know, she felt a bit embarrassed that she was the one person out of the group that had been turned away for being too drunk. But we can't obviously confirm that. The only person that knows why she didn't enter her accommodation that night is Libby, and unfortunately she is no longer around to tell us. But I just wanted to put in what kind of her friends and her family believed had happened. Now, that same night, a 24-year-old man called Powell Relowitz, who was a married father of two living in the area on Raglan Street, was prowling Hall's student district. CCTV caught his car many times cruising along Beverly Road. His car was a silver Vauxhall Astra. He was seen so many times in different areas of Hull. He wasn't out for work, he wasn't out for errands or a night out. He was out hunting. At 12:08 a.m, there's footage that shows him approaching Libby as she is sitting crying on that bench on Haworth Street. And within minutes, he persuades or forces her into his car. Now, Libby's own mum came out and said that she does not believe that Libby would have voluntarily got into a stranger's car, no matter how drunk she was. Apparently that is not something that she would have done, and all of her friends have also corroborated that, saying that it's not something that she would have ever dreamed of doing. That just wasn't Libby at all. She wouldn't get into a car with a random stranger, especially not when she was on her own. I'm not sure if I'll be able to find it, but I am going to try. There is a bit of CCTV footage that shows what is believed to be Powell Relowitz and Libby together heading down the street towards where his car was parked. And this is just before the footage that I'll include, where we can see what we think is Powell loading somebody into his passenger side before himself climbing into the driver's side and driving away.
You could actually see through the driver's side window the passenger side being broken and what appeared to be a set of legs getting into the front passenger seat.
Now, personally, when I first saw this footage, I remember saying that, in my opinion, it looks almost like he is dragging Libby towards his car, like she's trying to pull back and he is forcibly dragging her towards the car. But that's just my opinion. But do please let me know what you think about that footage. Now, between 12:08 and 12:16, there is more CCTV footage that shows his Astra driving directly onto Oak Road playing fields. And then the next 8 minutes is blank. From the moment Libby got into Relowitz's car, the clock was ticking. At 12:08 a.m, that CCTV captured his silver Vauxhall Astra leaving Beverly Road with Libby inside and heading towards the Oak Road playing fields. At 12:16 a.m, just 8 minutes later, his car is seen leaving Oak Road playing fields on CCTV and heading back towards his home on Raglan Street. 8 minutes. 8 minutes was all it took. Detectives believe that in those few minutes, Libby was raped and murdered by Powell Relowitz. Oak Road playing fields was isolated, dark, and it was bordered by the River Hull, a location he knew well from prowling the student area. What makes it even more chilling is what Relowitz did next. After returning home, he accessed violent pornography almost immediately after Libby's murder. His search history revealed that he wasn't shaken, he wasn't panicked, he wasn't disgusted with himself. He was aroused from what he had done. And just 2 hours later, as I mentioned earlier, at around 2:30 a.m, CCTV captured his Astra back in the Oak Road area. Detectives believe he returned to the scene of the crime, either to relive what he'd done or to ensure that he hadn't left any evidence behind of what he'd done to Libby. It was cold, it was calculated, and it was predatory. Now, at first glance, Paweł Relowitz looked like an ordinary man. He was a Polish immigrant working as a butcher in Malton, North Yorkshire. He was married, he had a wife, and he also had 2 young children. Neighbours thought of him as polite, and they described him as helpful and even a normal guy. But behind closed doors, he was anything but a normal guy. Relowitz had already been committing escalating sexual offences for years, ranging from voyeurism and burglary. He was stealing sex toys and women's underwear out of their houses. He was climbing into their window and stealing their underwear. He was exposing himself in public and stalking young women on their way home after nights out. Now, Detective Superintendent Martin Smalley later said in an interview that he was a sexual predator who was looking for an opportunity. He targeted Libby that night because she was vulnerable. Now, I do want to draw some attention to Libby's vulnerability that night. She had been drinking heavily, and she was drunk, distressed, and alone after she had walked away from her student accommodation. Now, her mother, Lisa, later came out and said, yes, Libby was drunk, but so have we all been. It wasn't an invitation. She did nothing wrong. And that is the truth. Many of us have been in that same situation, whether as students or just on nights out with friends where one drink became too many drinks. But being drunk should not mean that you're unsafe. It should not mean you'll be raped. It should not mean that you'll be murdered. Libby did do nothing wrong that night, and the only person responsible for what happened to Libby was Paweł Relowitz, was that predator who saw her vulnerability and chose to exploit it. By the morning of the 1st of February 2019, Libby was reported missing. And Humberside police launched their biggest missing persons search ever. There was over 100 officers, there was dive teams, helicopters, and thousands of volunteers from the local community and the university where Libby was a student. For 7 weeks, Hull was gripped. Posters lined pretty much every street in Hull. There was a vigil going on every other night. There were appeals where her mum Lisa pleaded on camera, "Please come home, sweetheart. We just want you back." Now, tragically, on the 20th of March, Libby's body was discovered in the Humber estuary near the Grimsby docks. I do just want to clarify that I know it might not have been fully clear from obviously the way that I've told the timeline, but Libby's body was found at Grimsby docks, well, near Grimsby docks, and her last known location was at the Oak Road playing field, which bordered on the River Hull. So I did just want to clarify that it is believed that what happened is that after raping and murdering Libby Squire, Paweł Relowitz then dumped her body into the River Hull, and in the 7 weeks it took to recover her body and piece the evidence and everything together, her body had been washed from the River Hull out into the Grimsby docks and towards the North Sea. So it is actually extremely lucky that Libby was managed to be recovered, because It's an incredibly fast-flowing area of water, and as I said, when her body was found near the Grimsby docks, that is going out towards the North Sea. So the chances are, if her body had been washed even further out towards the North Sea, she likely would have never been recovered and reunited with her family. So it is extremely lucky that they managed to recover her. But I did want to clarify that it is believed Powell Relowitz dumped her body into the River Hull, and she was then washed out and recovered at Grimsby docks. Relowitz was arrested days later after officers connected his silver Astra to the CCTV footage. Relowitz's mask of normality began to crack almost immediately. Detectives working around the clock pulled together the CCTV, witness testimony, and forensic evidence that painted a damning picture of Powell Relowitz. The most chilling evidence was that CCTV footage. Pardon me. It was time-stamped frame by frame. It showed Relowitz circling Beverley Road that night. His silver Vauxhall Astra slowed near Libby as she sat distressed on the bench. And as I said before, minutes later he was seen leading her towards the car before driving off in the direction of Oak Road playing fields. During interviews, Relowitz showed no remorse. He was even seen smirking and laughing in some interviews with police. He was calm, he was detached, he was almost clinical in how he described Libby. Investigators later recalled his chilling lack of empathy, as though he was talking about an object, not a young woman whose life he had just destroyed. It took months of painstaking work, combing CCTV, witness statements, forensic analysis, and his disturbing criminal record. But police had what they needed. And when the case finally reached the court, the jury didn't believe his lies for a second. So, getting on to the trial and sentencing. At Sheffield Crown Court, jurors saw the CCTV. They heard the witnesses, including that of a man that lived just in front of the Oak Road playing fields, who described having heard screaming in the early hours of the morning. And he had actually made a note of what time he'd heard this, and it was 12:14 a.m, which was bang in the middle of the time where Relowitz had taken Libby to Oak Road playing fields, and when his car had been seen leaving on CCTV. Apparently, the man said the reason he didn't report this at first was because he assumed that it was foxes making that noise, because female foxes, when they call out, they make it almost sounds like a screaming sound. But later investigation found that there were no signs of any foxes having been on the playing fields area. And it was only after hearing about Libby's disappearance that this gentleman came forward to report what he had heard that night. And it ended up being quite a crucial piece of evidence during the trial. But the CCTV was only the beginning. When police later got a warrant and searched his home and his car, they uncovered a disturbing cache of items. In the boot of his Vauxhall Astra, officers found a pink and blue duffel bag that was stuffed with women's underwear, sex toys, and explicit photographs. It was later found that these were all trophies taken from the burglaries and the sexual intrusions, kept as kind of souvenirs of his secret double life. And there was even more than that. There was an earlier investigation where 2 young girls had reported being followed home by a man. And after the connections with Libby's case, they called him in, took a DNA sample and everything like that. And forensics went back to re-examine these girls' house, because they said that he'd followed them all the way to their door. And what they actually found was semen on the front door of this house. and forensics collected that, and later on when it was compared to the DNA profile that they had obtained from Powell Relowitz, it was a match. There were also cases where young women had called the police after seeing a man looking through their windows and watching them get changed. Women were reporting seeing a peeping Tom outside their window, who was described as being in his early to mid-20s and wearing glasses. Now, this pattern of escalating behaviour, from peeping, burglary to indecent exposure and voyeurism, this had been going on for years, and it had been building up for years. It was clear that Relowitz wasn't just a man who had made a one-off mistake. He was a predator whose behaviour was snowballing into something that led up to the tragic event that we're talking about today. Detectives later said what happened to Libby was not an accident. It was the culmination of a pattern of sexually deviant behaviour. The CCTV, the trophies, the DNA, all of it painted Relowitz as not an ordinary butcher or a husband or a father of 2 young children, but it painted him as a dangerous sexual predator who had been hiding in plain sight for years without ever being caught. The jury listened as experts described her injuries and DNA evidence, including semen that was found inside of Libby. Now, Relowitz claimed that the sex was consensual, but nobody believed that for a second. For starters, we all know that Libby was drunk that night. Drunk enough that she'd been turned away from a nightclub, drunk enough that she was falling over in the street. So when you are that intoxicated, you cannot consent to something like that. You cannot consent to sexual activity. So straight away, there is no way that that sex could have been consensual. That was a man taking advantage of a vulnerable young woman. In custody, Relowitz tried to downplay his actions. He admitted being with Libby that night, but insisted their sexual encounter had been fully consensual. He repeatedly claimed he had left her alive at Oak Road, suggesting she must have wandered off towards the river and then subsequently fallen in and drowned. But detectives weren't buying it. The forensic evidence, the timeline, and his digital footprint told a completely different story. Eventually, after much deliberation and many agonising days, on the 11th of February 2021, Powell Relowitz was convicted of the rape and murder of Liberty Anna Squire. On sentencing, the judge told him, "You targeted a vulnerable young woman, you raped her and you murdered her. You are a very dangerous man." He was given life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years. Now, due to the amount of time that Libby's body had been in the water and due to water damage and decomposition, it wasn't actually possible to determine a cause of death. So we're not entirely sure what actually caused her to die. We don't know what method Powell Relowitz used. However, despite it being against recommendation from the coroners, Libby's mum Lisa was allowed to go and see her body, not for the purpose of identification, because they had already identified her by other means, but she wanted to say goodbye to her daughter. She wanted to be able to see her one last time and, kind of make it real that they'd found her. And Lisa said in an interview that she believed she could see evidence of like marks around Libby's neck that she believed were consistent with asphyxiation. So it is Lisa's belief that Powell Relowitz strangled her, and that is how he ended her life. Now, this hasn't been confirmed by forensics because, unfortunately, like I said, due to the length of time that her body was in the water, that damage could have come from anywhere. It could have, she could have, her body could have banged against things under the water while she was being washed out. Something might have got caught around her. It could have just been the way that her body had decomposed. So unfortunately that couldn't be confirmed, but Lisa believes that that is what resulted in her death. Lisa firmly believes that there is evidence that she was strangled by Powell Relowitz. Libby Squire was more than a case. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a student with a bright future. She had dreams, ambitions, a whole life ahead of her. Her mother said, "Libby was my treasure, my baby. She was everything to me, and she will always be loved." Her story reminds us of two truths: that predators can hide behind the most ordinary masks. They don't always look like these monsters we assume they will. And also, most importantly, vulnerability is not consent. Libby's family continued to campaign for greater awareness of sexual offending and better systems to protect women. There were so many opportunities during this case where Powell Relowitz could have been caught for other sexual offences, and if he had, Libby might still be with us today. This was Libby's story, not her killer's. Her memory deserves to live on. If this story has touched you, share it, not to spread fear, but to honour Libby and to stand against predators like Relowitz. If you enjoyed my coverage of this case, please give me a little like, give me a thumbs up. It helps YouTube to push the video out. Please subscribe so that you never miss an upload. I aim to upload a new true crime story every week or a new mystery every week, and I would absolutely adore to see you there. Please do leave me a comment with your thoughts on this case and any other cases that you would like to hear from me in the future. I will make sure to read them. I love reading all of my comments. And with that being said, I will see you next week on another episode of Murders and Mysteries with Moo. Bye.